Welcome to Teaching Artist Podcast, a show dedicated to discussions of teaching art to kids, making art, and how those things overlap and feed each other. I'm Rebecca Potts, your host, a visual arts teaching artist. I was excited to talk with David T. Miller, whose work is so full of color and texture. He talked about having a dialogue with his work and also encouraging his students to do the same, to listen to the work and what it tells you. David T. Miller has been active in art education since 1980 when he began teaching art at a high school in San Antonio, Texas. After a period of 7 years in the classroom, he became an admissions counselor for the Kansas City Art Institute. Art school admissions travel provided a first-hand national perspective of high school and community college art classrooms and their students. This was augmented by regular attendance at national and regional Portfolio Day events, with insight obtained from countless student interviews and portfolio reviews. Miller's initial goal was to return to the classroom energized and informed by the experience of 2 or 3 years of admissions travel. In 1998, 11 years and 4 art colleges later, Kansas City Art Institute, School of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, San Francisco Art Institute, and the School of Visual Arts in New York City, he returned to the high school classroom at Wissahickon High School in Ambler, Pennsylvania. He currently teaches courses titled Honors Art, Portfolio Art, AP Art, and Ceramics 1. He received the Secondary Art Teacher of the Year award from the Pennsylvania Art Education Association in 2015. Miller's teaching methodology has been referred to in various publications. He believes in student discovery as the primary path to learning. He believes all students are artists, and everything can be considered art. One of his primary goals in the classroom is to stay out of students' way. Miller is an active art maker. His work is of a non-representational nature that strives for spontaneity and undirected playfulness. He has exhibited nationally and internationally. He has degrees from Southwest Texas State University and University of the Arts. Let's hear from David. Hi.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. So I'm here with David Miller. And do you include the T in there? Because I know there's another David Miller. So David T. Miller.
And there's something important about that T. There's no period after it.
Ah.
Yeah, if you Google David T. Miller or David Miller, there's like, Joe Smith. There's a lot of us.
Right.
And I'm from San Antonio. And, if you Google David Miller artist San Antonio, you'll still get more.
Oh, my goodness. So that's very important.
Yeah.
So I like to start just with some background, and I like to frame it as you're an artist, but you're also a teacher. Which one kind of came first, and how did you come to be both of those things?
I didn't set out to do either. And I always liked to draw and stuff as a kid, but I didn't have a very solid, I had a very weak art experience in school. I didn't take art until my senior year of high school, and it was a complete blow-off class. It was a first-year teacher, and he had a lot of behavior problems, and I wasn't one. And so I could do whatever he asked us to do the night before, give it to him, and he would give me a 98 or 100, and I had no idea what I did right or what I did wrong, so I had no appreciation for it.
Yeah.
And I set out to, when I had to go to college, I'm the oldest and the only son of my family, and my mom was dead set about me going to college. And my dad didn't go to school, but he was a musician in the Air Force. He was a trumpet player in the Air Force.
Oh, wow.
But my mom, you got to go do something. So I picked physical therapy as a major. And I don't know really why I picked that. I liked sports and stuff, but I was never going to be an athlete. And of course, I went off to school, and the courses that I was supposed to take for that major, I was completely unprepared, and I dropped out. I essentially flunked out my first semester. And so the drive, that was at North Texas State, and the drive back to San Antonio was like 6 hours. And my that was the longest 6 hours of my life, sitting in the back seat, watching my dad glare at me in the rearview mirror as we drove back. It was painful. And so we got back, and my mom was, you're going to go to the community college. I was like, okay, whatever, So at the community college, I bounced around. I was, I was radio, television, and film. At one point, I thought it would be a DJ. Another point, I've always liked music, but I wasn't good enough to be a music major. I took a couple art classes, and something was clicking. For the first time, wasn't watching the clock. And so then I transferred from San Antonio College to Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos, just south of Austin, and started taking classes. And I was a terrible undergraduate student. I was more there for the party. But as I got further into it, I couldn't think of what to do. Major in. And back then in art, at least there was only two choices. You were a commercial artist major or an education major. And I hated school, but I hated deadlines even more. And that's what commercial art sounded like to me. And so I thought, well, I'll just do the education thing until I get a clue. And so that actually was I tell people that was the best whatever thing I did in my life, maybe, because it gave me an opportunity to learn. And because I was starting out in that area behind everybody around me, like my classmates in college had been the cool art kid at their high school, and they were really good and all that good stuff. And all the professors loved them, but I was so far behind that I had to work hard. And I got to the point where when I began to teach, I didn't want to do that. I thought I would just do that for a year. And then I discovered that in my mind that everything that they told me to do in art education classes, it didn't work for me. Nothing worked. And I was so stoked. I planned out everything. I had like my first 9 weeks planned out. So, all written out and everything. And it went out the window in the first 20 minutes of my first day. And I went back into the storeroom and just cried. I told the kids to just talk about their summer. I'll talk to them later. And I went back and wept like a baby. And I went home at the time, and I thought I was going to quit, but I couldn't because I had just got married for the first time and was buying a house and, had too many obligations. So as I threw everything out and I started doing stuff that was in line with what I did as a college student. And what was awesome was that the students were able to just totally do that. They didn't need to be handheld. They didn't need to be babied. They could, I gave them the drawing assignments that we had in college, and they were able to do it. I'd give them the same exact design things I had in my design class. They were able to do it. So things really began to click, and I began to get really passionate about that. And I was the only teacher at a very large high school in Texas. And then I started getting phone calls from art schools to come visit and recruit, which I didn't even know there was such a thing. There was such a thing as an art school. The first school it called was Rhode Island School of Design.
Yeah.
And I remember answering the phone, and I only had like 3 minutes. And this person with a Northeastern voice says, I'm calling you from RISD. And I said, okay, look, I don't know what a RISD is. And I don't have much time here. Can you hurry this up? And so she was very polite with me, patient. And then that opened up in a huge door for me. Chicago came, and then Kansas City, and various schools began to come. And I'm standing in the back of the class feeling I wanted my students to be exposed to all that because I wasn't. Plus, it was exciting. But I also felt pretty robbed that I didn't know about any of that. So after about 7 years, I got an invitation to work at the Kansas City Art Institute, to apply, rather. And that was a life changer. And my job was in admissions. So I got paid to fly around the United States and go to the best high school art and community college art programs out there. And my boss was the closest I've ever had to a mentor. She's also the person that got me to Pennsylvania. But she was a hardcore art ed person. And most people in admissions are not art education oriented. They're recruiters, and so she just wound me up and gave me a credit card and just said, go do what you want to do, which was awesome. So I thought I would just do that for a couple of years. But every time I tried to quit, I would get another offer. I had built up a reputation. So I worked for with the Kansas City Art Institute, the San Francisco Art Institute, the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I wound up at SVA in New York, where I met my wife. And that was just awesome. But after a while, I wanted to get off the road, and I came to Pennsylvania for me to finish a master's degree in art ed, and we wound up staying here and having a family. And coincidentally, the school where I teach is like maybe a mile away from where we live in a little town called Ambler. And I've been there for, 20 some years, I guess.
Wow.
And so I've had a lot of freedom there. And after grad school, the thing that happened, a very magical thing that happened for me was, for the first time in my career, in my life, I was able to read what I called academic material, dealing stuff that dealt with art history, but primarily visual culture and things like that, because that was coming into play at the time. And I was able to read that for myself for the first time. I didn't have to write any papers. I didn't have to give any reports. I could just learn for the sake of learning. And I was like 50 years old or late 40s when that happened, and that was magical, because then I just read everything possible. And I was active in the National Art Education Association and the Pennsylvania version. And I used to go make myself do presentations, and I networked like crazy, not intentionally, but it just happened to work out that way. And that's how I got here. I mean, it's been fun.
Yeah. And during that whole time, were you still making your own artwork?
Well, no, off and on. Off and on.
Yeah.
I had a pretty strong direction at the beginning, like when I was still teaching in San Antonio, because when I first got my summers off with a paycheck, no matter how little the paycheck was at the time, I still had time off. Yeah. Which was, important. I had a good period of time making things that I'm still proud of. And it wasn't until I didn't make stuff that for very often. I've moved a whole lot in my life, and I've been married 3 times. So I've had a lot of, done a lot of different things. But so when I came here and started working, I felt like I had a really strong feeling like if I'm going to teach art, I should be making art. And plus, I was my ideas of what art was and could be developed more in my adult years, I guess, and because of my exposure and my reading and watching my students. And I have a colleague that his name is Ian Williams, who, when we were able to hire him, was really important because we got to spend a lot of time talking. He was another art teacher. We actually shared a studio for several years, almost 4 years here in Ambler. But at one point he said, he says, dude, you need to be making more art, because I was making a few things, and he gave me reinforcement, because I never had any audience, never sold anything, didn't have other art friends so much. And so he pushed me, and then I started a website immediately, and we talked and talked and talked, and I developed the idea that whatever I made, I was going to put out there, meaning online, for better or worse. My attitude was nobody's going to see it anyway, so what difference does it make? And, and I want to learn more about a website, so what the heck? And I got very compulsive. I guess I'm very compulsive. And so I began to make lots of stuff. And, when you're making things, it leads to other things. And so I don't know how many years ago that was, but ever since I've got more obsessive, and it's great because I'm hoping to retire in a year. And it's opened a lot of doors for me. And I've got, I don't worry about the confidence level that much anymore. I've just accepted the fact that I'm insecure, and being able to have conversations with my friend Ian and other artists that I have met since then. I realized that everybody's pretty much in the same boat. And so I've kind of settled in to what I do and maybe who I am, whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah. And putting it out there thinking nobody's going to see this. People are seeing it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's the most, that's very, very exciting when somebody, from another country comments on your work, and then it's even more exciting when the person that's commenting on your work is somebody that you admire. You admire their work, and they're complimenting yours, and you're like, wow, they're in Australia. Here I am in Ambler. What's this all about? So the world got really smaller with social media. And when I first got into social media, it was just strictly for art. And now, Facebook has changed over the years. It's far more political. But Instagram, I think, is still mostly art. Yeah. And it's fun.
Yeah. I'm like, Instagram is my big one now, too. Yeah. I wanted to ask, when you were traveling a lot, sort of recruiting for art schools, did seeing such a variety of, students, artwork, arts, working for different art schools, and even just like seeing different places, did that impact your own work? Were you?
Absolutely. It impacted. I consider that to be my true schooling for education, at least for that period of my life, because I would go to schools that had nothing, in terms of material things, and no budget, no nothing. And the kids could be very passionate and doing risky, wonderful, beautiful things, expressing themselves, and, awesome. And then I would go to another school that had everything. I remember visiting a school, I won't mention, but I walked in, and the teacher or the department chair was walking me from the central office, and he says, I just want to to warn you in advance that we don't have a whole lot. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking, you've got more than a college does. They just had so much and so much. They had all the equipment, they had all the space. They had about 7 or 8 teachers, art teachers.
Wow.
And then when I started, I did my presentation and I started visiting with students, there wasn't much going on, So in my mind, I that influenced everything. And because I knew at that point during those years, even though I wound up doing that longer than I anticipated, I knew that I was going to be back in the classroom. That was my goal. And so I did that. That was like 11 years of my life. Everywhere I went, I was looking for stuff to rip off, and I would tell teachers or anybody or students. And the other rich thing was portfolio days, because you're meeting all kinds of students and talking with them about their work. And it was very influential. I could not wait to get back in the classroom with all this stuff in my mind. Of course, there are other things that became hurdles when I did get back in the classroom. But that's a very good question, because that was a huge learning experience for me.
Yeah.
I had perspective. I gained perspective that very few people have. In fact, it's interesting because my colleague, Ian Williams, that works with me, he actually was in admissions for 5 years, I think, at University of the Arts in Philadelphia. And so when we hired him, I was the department chair at the time. When we hired him, I was like, dude, there's probably no other high school in the United States with 2 people who have been at admissions, who've traveled around looking at other schools.
Yeah.
Most teachers, what they see is every day is all they know. And maybe they go to a district show, maybe they go to a conference, but it's sad that they don't get a chance to go in other people's classrooms and just sit there and observe, because you learn a lot.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. That should be like part of professional development somehow.
Absolutely. Where you just go hang out. You don't have to go do a report. You just go hang out. And, if the teacher, just like any other part of life, you either bond with them or you don't. And with the kids, same thing, because sometimes some teachers were like, just walk around and talk. And a lot of my visits, I would be there the entire day and I would do my little spiel, and then he'd set me up in a room and kids would line up. We would just have conversations. It was wonderful.
Wow, cool. And what would you say is your kind of teaching style?
My teaching style, I laugh because I started off first-year teacher doing what my art ed professors told me to do. And the main thing was all about assessment. And I remember sitting there, and had drawn still life, and I sat where the students sat with their drawing, and I tried to think of how tall they were, and I would try to get my eyes lined up where their eyes might have been lined up, and I'm looking at their drawing, and I'm looking at the still life, and I'm grading the drawing. And that was a disaster from the beginning, because what was it that I was after? I don't know. I didn't know. A reproduction like a photo, I didn't know. So if you start looking for mistakes, which I think a lot of grading is, you find them.
Yeah.
And the definition of a mistake is challenging, because for most of us in art, that's what the beauty is. It's the nuance. It's the stuff that is, so I got very looser, and I felt guilty because I didn't want the administrators to see me. He's just saying, that looks like an A. You worked hard, so what do you want? An A? Sure, you got an A. What number? And so now, at the end of my career, and I have been like this for the last 20 years since I came back to teaching, I am the most liberal grader there is. Everybody starts off with an A, and you really have to go out of your way to make that get lower. The only way you can make it get lower is to not turn something in. And fortunately, I'm around, like I said, Ian Williams, we're philosophically in line, which is good. So my style is to get out of their way.
Yeah.
And I walk around, I tell stupid bad dad jokes every now and then. I say goofy things because that's who I am, I guess. But then we have conversations based on that. And I guess what I'm assessing is not the piece. It's the process and the amount of effort, I guess, that the student puts into it.
Yeah.
So my style is no style now. Right. I walk around, I go, hey, what's up? Hey, today's trash day in Ambler. How about that? Hey, yeah. Oh, wow, you missed a spot. And they go, what? Is that supposed to be blue or red? Or what? Are you sure you want that? And then we just have conversations about the work.
Yeah. When
I'm being observed is another story. By an administrator, I'm like doing all the little things I'm supposed to do. And the kids are I always warn them because, they might say, Mr. Miller, why are you acting so weird? Just because the principal's in the room, they're like, shut up, be quiet. We're going to do a do now. And we're going to do an extra ticket. And here's a Padlet.
It's such a difference teaching high school, because I'm at the elementary level, and you can, especially with the upper elementary, you can kind of joke around with them, but it's not the same level that you would be able to joke around in high school.
Oh, I bet. I can't comprehend elementary.
They're adorable, though.
Oh, I know. Yeah. That's so they tell me.
But I mean, I think that's the style of get out of their way. That is the style. And there's trying to encourage their creativity and push them a little bit along the way, but kind of letting it be their own ideas and their own making.
And letting them fail.
Yeah.
Whatever failure might be, let them struggle, because that's what they remember. If they overcome something themselves, then they've learned. If I tell them how to draw a shoe, they haven't learned.
Right.
And there's a lot of teachers, I'm sure you've come across some, there's a lot of teachers out there, that's what they do. They have a recipe and they show an exemplar, and this is what the kid is supposed to do. And that's how they're graded, by how similar their product is to the exemplar, and what have they learned, So that's not my style at all. My style is like, okay, you screwed up. How much more time do you need?
Yeah. What are you going to do to change it?
And there was a very pivotal moment in a critique, which, my critiques nowadays are pretty much show and tell, which is the way I like it. Yeah. They're not pretentious at all. But there was some years ago, there was a young man who had not applied himself regularly, and so we had this thing, like first period, I forget what the assignment was. They were painting something like cultural narrative. I don't know what it was, because I'm really into that kind of stuff. And so people had their pieces set up on easels, and we're sitting around in a circle. And this guy looked really burned out, and it was first period. And his piece, he started talking. He said, well, I was impressed that he even brought something in, because usually he hadn't done that, and especially on time. And he says, I don't know, man, this is a failure. And I said, well, what do you mean? And all the rest of the kids got quiet. He goes, I don't know. I've been working on this. And he says, I've been taking risks like you try to get me to do. And it's like 2:00 in the morning. He says, I had something go on really good, I thought. He said, 2:00 in the morning, I tried something and it didn't work. It ruined the whole piece. And I'm just sitting there being quiet, watching him talk or listening to him talk and watching the other kids in the room. And he was crushed, but he was so worn out from being up all night. And, he was emotionally and physically just exhausted. Yeah. And so I would usually ask the kids, what grade do you think they deserve? And then ask them to give me a rationale. So I did that. And I said, so what grade, what grade do you think he deserves? And they jumped on me like nobody's business. They said, he deserves an A, Mr. Miller. And I was like, I didn't say I wasn't going to give him an A, but why? Because exactly what you said, taking risks, and risks are dangerous. And they, that doesn't always work out. And what he's doing right now is different than anything he's ever done. And it's blah, 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 blah. And I just sat there and let him go, And I said, he had an A the moment he opened his mouth. So it's okay. Yeah. But that was fun and it was pivotal, because when they started doing what you asked them to do and thinking like that you asked them to think, behaving like you asked them to behave, a teacher, if you're in that position, you've got to be really careful that you allow that to happen.
Yeah. And encourage it. Yeah. They're showing behaviors of an artist.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You talked about how so many teachers kind of teach to a very specific example. And I keep finding like the more I talk to artists who are still like practicing artists who are teachers, the less I see that.
Right.
Like so many of us, when we're really active in our own making, want to encourage that kind of activity in kids.
Absolutely.
Which is amazing to see.
Yeah, you had a question along those lines, I guess, about if there was a new teacher, what kind of tips would I give a new teacher?
Yes.
And I have had student teachers, of course, with various degrees of success. I have a really strong answer to that question. Yeah. And that's what I just said. Get out of their way. Don't overteach. That's the frustration I've had with many student teachers, is that they want to be a teacher. And they are not as open to student learning as they should, in my mind, because student learning is often student-centered. Most of the time it is students, maybe all the time it's student-centered, and the teacher is the catalyst. But like I've had student teachers that just would stand over a student, hover over them, and not even let them work. And they'd say, oh, no, your shading is off. You need to give me your pencil. Let me show you how to do this. And I'm like, I calmly call them off to the side. I'm like, just back off, will you? let the kid do whatever. you know. And then I had one that he says, yeah, I'm gonna meet with a student during her lunch. And right off the bat, I had an alarm go off. And I said, what do you mean you're going to meet with her during her lunch? And he says, well, her drawing, she really needs work. And so I'm going to show her how to draw. And I sat there and I thought, oh man, this is more challenging than I think I'm ready for today. But I said, so there's a way to draw? You know the way to draw? And he was like, well, you know, and he realized right off the bat that I was not agreeing with what he was saying. And I said, you know what? Her way of drawing is her way of drawing. It's a voice. She will develop that voice if given an opportunity. So her voice has to be her voice and not your voice. So I'd appreciate it if you let her eat her lunch, because that's all the time she has, and then let her continue to draw. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but back off.
Right. Yeah. Like, I feel like sometimes it's the hardest thing is self-control as a teacher, and like not jumping in when you notice something that, like your shading could be better there, but what does that even mean? What is better?
Right. And maybe they're not a shader.
Yeah. Just holding yourself back.
Yeah. And some of my favorite student work is you spend all your time trying to convince the kid of its value, you know, because it doesn't look like a photo. It doesn't look like the other kids' work in the class. They're supposed to be the strong ones or whatever, but there's something there that's magical and passionate. And you're like, man, can you do 5 more of these? You know, can you keep this vein going? Keep this vibe going.
Yeah.
And they look at you like, sure, Mr. Miller. But this is really weird. Yeah, it's good weird.
Yeah. Well, I love it's like a art teacher favorite across the board, The Dot, that little children's book.
Oh, yeah.
But the idea there, the very, very minimal sort of simple thing that the teacher does, where she just says, you know, see what happens and just make a mark. And then after the kid does, and the kid's kind of like, this is trash.
Yeah.
She says, sign it for me. And then the next day it's hung up in a frame. Like the teacher didn't do a lot there. She didn't tell her what color to use or what type of mark to make, or, you know, critique the mark after it was made. She just said, do something. The kid did something. And then the teacher said, awesome, this is art. And then it like sparked this idea in the kid that, you know, oh, wow, maybe I am an artist, actually.
Well, that's one of the questions that I entertain with high school. I have for years. What is art and who decides? It's a really basic question and a very difficult question.
Yeah.
It's a multifaceted question, and it depends on who's answering that question. But the kids, I've been there long enough now to where, you know, kids kind of buy into much of what I'm trying to get them to experience.
Yeah.
They joke around about it, you know, like wabi-sabi. Oh, man, that's so wabi-sabi. Yeah, well, I broke it. Yeah, well, repair it with gold. Yeah. You know? And I'll say, Mr. Miller, and with my grading, it's so funny because several years ago, I always tell them I wish it was pass-fail. And I would say, I think you got a fail minus. And they would laugh, you know. But this girl was sitting in front of the class, and she was a very outgoing young lady. And she was working on something. She held it up. She goes, what do you think, Mr. Miller? Dope or nope? And I said, oh, man. Oh, that was the most magical thing I've heard in a long time. We made a T-shirt that said dope or nope. Mr. Miller's grading system or whatever.
Oh, I love that. I had to write that one down.
So then, of course, something like that is fodder for deeper conversations. So like, what is it, dope minus?
Right.
Dope plus? It's nope, but it's getting there, you know?
Yeah. All the grays in between. Yeah. And kind of like last teaching question, and then I want to get into more of your art and your process and art making. I wanted to ask how you're kind of managing teaching online right now, and like what resources have been helpful. Yeah.
It's very, very hard. We had like 30 minutes to get out of the building, and we couldn't even get our stuff, couldn't get any of our stuff. Some students, I saw about 3 or 4 students running out of my room. They ran straight, this was awesome, they ran straight to my room to get what they were working on and to get some of their art supplies, and that was what they valued.
Yeah.
But most kids right now have nothing, or they have very little art supply in the line of art supplies. They have very little time. They might be, you know, their whole family, and sometimes they're staying with one parent or the other, if they're staying with a parent at all. And so it's very, very challenging. And I could not, fortunately, our principal said she wanted us to in the arts, in the electives, to go easy because the kids were going to have their hands full with the core classes and APs and all that because those teachers are trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was awesome that we didn't have the expectations because I wasn't going to be able to meet any expectations, I didn't think.
Right.
I can't talk to the kids. Rarely can I talk to them. I can't see them, and they don't have any material. So those are some serious barriers.
Right.
We use this program called Schoology, and so we communicate like email type of thing, which is terrible. So what I did was with the art, my honors and portfolio and AP students, I created this thing called Padlet, which I'd never used before, but I put one together with the help of one of our staff developers. It's really basic, but I thought, okay, we don't get to talk. I don't force much in the line of art history or art theory or criticism with my students because that's not what they signed up for. And for the most part, they're not interested in it. And they'd rather be making work, which I understand. But that's all I had. And I taught several years ago a class called Art, Literature, and Ideas with an English teacher. And it ran two times, and it was the best class ever. Because neither one of us agreed on what art was. And so I was the one who was all well-read on the topics, modernism and postmodernism and things like that. So I put together a reading list, and we made podcasts, and we did all this other stuff. So I reverted to that.
Yeah.
And with my, I don't know how many weeks we have, like 6 maybe of the marking period from when we started this, I was searching all over YouTube, and I curated this experience that I'm pretty pleased with, where I kind of introduced them to modernism and postmodernism at first. And so then I took them through like the various isms. There was one video I have on there, what ism and what isn't, or something like that. And they were at first, they're like, oh, why does anybody need this? Blah, 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 blah. But I wanted them to have some sort of perspective.
Yeah.
And then I was really tickled because I asked them to respond. But however, it could be as minimal as they want, or they can wax rhapsodic if they want. And so reading the responses was really insightful for me because some of the kids really loved it. And then I'm not supposed to post in advance. I'm not sure why, but since we're at like the seniors only have about 1 more week or 2 more weeks left, I went ahead and put the last 2 topics on there the other day, which is outsider art and then parody. And with the parody, I have there's a Simpsons episode where there's Ma and Pa art, which is awesome. And there's the SpongeBob one is called The Artist Within or something like that. But both of those episodes are really, really fun, entertaining, and good. But what students didn't realize whenever I showed them those before was that they're really parody. You could be laughing at something and not have any idea what you're laughing at. And then you find out about Rauschenberg and Motherwell and some of these other people. And then you watch those things again, and you go, oh, I see what they're referencing.
Yeah.
And so that's how I'm finishing. So I've got that. And then there's we were supposed to have resources for them. So I have another Padlet where I had a blast. I'm still adding. I will probably be adding stuff to that for a long time. And I have stuff on there for my ceramic students, but it's like a resource that I should have done years ago because I have links all over the creation.
Yeah.
And I have a student website, which got sort of supplanted by the Schoology thing. All my students in those classes have their own websites where they're supposed to, post their work and respond to prompt questions and things like that. They don't always keep up with it very well.
Yeah.
But on my website, I had a lot of resources, but this Padlet that I put together is superior because you can just scroll down various topics and see all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah. And would it be okay to link to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'll share that one so listeners can go look.
And keep in mind, though, if somebody's reading the comments that the students are making, that they are all over the place. And sometimes they're, doing it. And they've got 3 minutes to do this. And I've been pestering them, like, just say something. Would you just post something so I can give you a grade? I got to give you a grade for this.
Yeah.
I don't want to, but I got to. So it's kind of fun. Like when I got to conceptual art, I guess that's the one for this week or this past week. I knew that was going to be a challenge for some folks. And even though I carefully brought them up to this point, it just isn't for everybody. And it's interesting to see which kids just still were offended by the concept of a concept being art or something being really super minimal. And then other students found it extremely liberating. And because they're sometimes not the kid who draws and paints the best in the class, but they have great ideas. And so for them to see that having great ideas for the first time, from hearing it from somebody other than Mr. Miller, they're like, wow, this is so cool.
Yeah.
It's fun. And then, of course, the outside outsider art, which is the one that's coming up this week. Maybe it starts today. I don't tell them that I don't like that term, outsider art. Outside of what, And so already I think a couple of kids have said, that have commented like, this isn't really fair. I mean, who needs to go to school to be an artist, So I'm like, yeah, keep talking.
Yes.
But now this whole idea of rigor is supposed to be as rigorous as it would be if we were sitting in the class under normal conditions.
Right.
And I'm thinking, what kind of drugs are you folks on? This can't happen. It's not going to happen. So I feel really paranoid now. And then the other thing, I was telling my wife the other day, I said, I've got 1 year left. With my luck, you watch, I'm going to get COVID and die in May. I won't have my retirement.
That's awful.
I guess as soon as we start doing something, it'll take over. But everybody's just freaking out, and the people who have my good friend, his wife is very compromised. She's got cystic fibrosis, and he's my buddy that I teach with, and he doesn't know. He can't go back. He doesn't know what to do.
Yeah,
waiting to see what they're going to let him do, but he can't quit because he needs our insurance for her. Everything is just complicated right now.
It's crazy. Yeah. Would you be able to take early retirement, or is that?
No, we need the money. So
yeah,
it's all coming from the almighty dollar. But
right. It's so tough, so frustrating.
It is. It's very tough.
Yeah.
But art-wise, I've had some time to do some work, which is great.
Yeah, and it's great. I love seeing it.
Yeah, I got another batch I wanted to finish up this week, but I don't think I'm going to now. I got a thing. There's this paper bag show in Australia I'm going to be in.
Oh, cool.
That, and then the show in Ireland, there's a lady over there, Georgie Bergamatzi, I believe is her last name, and she's got a little show with about 4 or 5 people, and she included me, which was cool. It's in a little museum there in Limerick, Ireland.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And then there's a thing going on in Paris, outside of Paris. There's another Facebook friend, Ludovic Duvalier. He's got a gallery now, and his first show is going to include me.
Awesome.
Which is fun, very, very fun. Then there's something going on in Ohio, which is very cool. So, with that going on, that's awesome.
Yeah, so many shows coming up or happening.
Yeah, I just want to do that. Forget the school stuff.
Right. Just keep painting and shipping them all over the place.
Yeah.
So I've been kind of going back and talking to people that I had already recorded with but hadn't released the episodes yet, and asking specifically which Black artists or other artists of color you share with students, and if there's any that you think really have an impact on students. And this is not that we can build like a comprehensive list, but just as a way to help me, help other teachers who are listening, maybe add to their like mental library of artists, especially that so many of us have grown up and gone through school with, a focus on the typical like Western canon of art that doesn't often include these people.
White guys, the dead white guy canon of art.
Yep. So, yeah.
I say that in front of my students all the time. Because I may have told you before, but I don't really talk about the Van Goghs and Impressionism and all that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And the kids, they find it on their own. They don't need me to talk about it. And especially with social media over the last 10 years or more, that has opened up a whole avenue for living, breathing artists that are far more important to me than the white European guys. And so, in class, I refer to them as the dead white European males. And now the kids are used to hearing me say that. But at first, sometimes they'll do a double take. Like, what did he just say? What I think he just said? Yeah, I did. And I mean it.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. And it's funny because when you sent me that message, I thought, wow, I don't know. I thought, I don't, okay, artists of color. I don't know any. And then I thought, wait a minute. I don't ever think about color. I mean, I would do sometimes, but not very often. Not when I'm thinking about artists. I think about it in a different context of like when you're watching the news and all the stuff that's going on in the world today, especially the United States, that's so painful. I think of that every day. But when I think of fellow artists, I don't often. So I thought, well, wait a minute. There's my good buddy, Mikhail, that I love his posts. I see him all the time, frequently. And so I started writing down names. So I have sort of 2 groups. The people that I have come in contact with in person or through social media, and I share all that with my students. And then there's the other folks that are the bigger picture, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
That, like, right off the bat, I would think of Jean-Michel Basquiat, Faith Ringgold, and Kara Walker, who's maybe as old as the others. But so if you want, I can go through a little list that I have here and just give you some names.
Sure, yeah.
People that I think are super, super relevant. And if people aren't looking, are not familiar with this, folks, I think they really should look them up because they have very, very rich work.
Yeah, and I'll look for links and include links when I share the episode.
Okay. Well, the first name I have is Mikel Elam, Mikelelam. And tell me if I'm going too fast.
No, that's great.
And Tim McFarlane. It's TimMcfarlane.
Right.
Killer work. Really wonderful, beautiful people. Carl Hayward. I don't know him personally, but he's a Facebook friend. And, I've communicated with him periodically. I love his work and what he seems to post. Carl Hayward is spelled pretty much the way it sounds. CarlHeyward. There's another guy up in New York. I think Carl is in New York too, but Clintel Steed, ClintelSted. I met him a few years ago in a show. I guess we were both then up on the Lower East Side, and somebody else introduced me to him. He's a really, really awesome guy, and I started paying attention to his work, and he's super awesome. Peter Williams, it's just spelled the way it sounds. Booker Stephen Carpenter. He is actually, he might still be the chair of the department at Penn State in the art program, but he's also really, really active in the Art Ed Association, and he does a lot of very cool things with like sustainability.
Oh, nice.
I think ceramics might be his primary art form, but he does really cool stuff. And of course, Kehinde Wiley, you probably know about him. Mark Bradford.
Yeah.
Kara Walker. She students really love her stuff. Viola Frey. I don't know if I pronounced her last name right or not. It's, Frey, just beautiful ceramics pieces, sculptural things. Carrie Mae Weems.
Oh, yeah.
And then my last one is Carrie James Marshall. I went from thinking, I don't know of anybody, to suddenly having 20 names. I thought, I better just stop here.
It's great. I know I've been putting down on paper, on the computer, my list, and it just keeps growing and growing, which is great.
Well, on my school website, I think I mentioned to you before, I have artists' links on the left side in the sidebar. Sometimes the links go bad and nobody tells me because I don't go check them out every day.
Yeah.
I would say all the artists that I post for my students to look at fall into this category of living, breathing, contemporary folks.
Yeah.
So, I don't have a section for the old dead guys.
Yeah.
You can type, they could go Google that.
Right. Or hear about them from all of their other teachers. Yeah. I kind of approach it the same way, that I figure, because I also don't have them all year, their classroom teachers do art with them when I'm not with them. And I figure the classroom teachers are probably going to gravitate towards those old dead white guys that have like 5 million lesson plans available online.
Oh, God, yeah.
So I don't need to talk about them.
Go to dickblick.com and download lesson plans.
Right. Right. So then the other question I had that's maybe trickier is, do you, or how do you, if you have been, create an anti-racist environment in the classroom? Or do you plan to kind of work to get there? And how would you be like adjusting your curricula or methods?
That's a really tough question. My classroom, I have never had any friction. I don't have as many students of color as I wish I did. We've talked about that in our department, in our art department, and I don't really know why that is, and we'd like to have that change.
Is it different from like the whole school community?
Yeah, I think so. I think it is. I think there are fewer students of color, definitely at the higher levels. Like I told you, I teach Ceramics 1, which is an intro class, and then I have the honors art and portfolio art in AP. And there aren't very many students of color that I mean, it's not like I have none, but it's certainly not a 50-50 split by any means. And I'm not sure why that is. So as far as my environment goes, it's very, very open and accepting. And it has been ever since I came back to teaching, for the last 20 some years. And the work that the students do is generally the ideas and so forth. I tease and I have prompts, but they generate their own topics pretty much. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes I'll do a topic that I'll bring on, and I plan on doing this again now. It would be something like cultural narrative. Mm-hmm. So I bring that, I've brought that into everything. I've brought that into still life work.
Yeah.
And the idea, I'm sure I'm going to revisit this one, of history. Mm-hmm. Whose history? History, herstory. Yeah. Who tells the stories? Right now, I think that's real important, because some of the conversation I've seen and participated in on social media recently is dealing with like the riots in Tulsa mm-hmm. in the early part of last century, and Japanese internment camps, mm-hmm. the Trail of Tears maybe, but there's a mm-hmm. place not far from where I am, Carlisle Indian School. That's what it's called, the Carlisle Indian School. And I was having this conversation with Mikkel Elam. Like, these are not things that we got in school. He went to school up here in Pennsylvania. I went to school primarily in Texas and Mississippi, and I didn't know about Japanese internment camps until I was in college. Mm. And I didn't, and I was in Texas, and Tulsa is right up the road, and there was no mention whatsoever of the Black Wall Street race riots.
Right.
And all the people that were murdered. That was it was not part of our history. The history was filtered that we had to go study in school, and all this stuff, all the negative American stuff wasn't part of it.
Right.
And so as I got older and began to encounter these things, and I was just, it was with disbelief at first, and then just flabbergasted. And then I became angry every time I hear this kind of stuff that, it's systematic. Mm-hmm. We're not going to write about this stuff. I mean, my own father, bless him, I guess, I remember early on, many, many years ago, couldn't understand why there was a holiday for Martin Luther King. Mm. And I'm like, Dad, you're a church-going dude. How can you be such a racist? Yeah. And it didn't go over very well, but it's, it's how things. That's something I address in class, and I did before current times, mm-hmm. because I feel that there's all kinds of groups that are left out, mm-hmm. and then I think that it seems like a lot of the problems that we're facing right now is that the people who thought that they were in power, even if they've contributed nothing to that, are kind of freaking out that, hey, under the notion of equality, the other is just as important as I am. Mm-hmm. And speaking of the other, that's another topic that I have incorporated many times and will continue to do so. But I don't really know I don't have a game plan mm-hmm. yet to go in and proactively address this topic. Mm-hmm. I'm also not sure, this might sound funny, or weird, but I don't know that I want to, if I go in there and say, okay, today we're going to do artists of color, mm-hmm. that's almost like, and I will bring it in, but like I don't say today we're going to do impressionists. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's kind of going back to in a way in my mind, this idea of creating a group and assigning people to it, which, like when I said I wasn't sure that I knew artists of color until I sat down and started writing names. Oh yeah, that's right. She, okay, yeah. And I don't really want to think that way, but I guess we have to. So I'm really unsure of a lot of things right now. I feel like I've been in a good position because these are topics that I've promoted and investigated with my students for the last 20 some years.
Right.
But is that enough? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel really strongly right now about the, Black Lives Matter. I get upset when I see somebody else say, yeah, every life matters. No, it doesn't. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's like,
like it does, but it only does once these.
If all lives matter, we wouldn't be having this discussion about Black lives.
Right.
Yeah. I feel, I don't know about you, but I feel almost more responsibility or something as a white person to be someone who speaks up in those situations. And like, even if I speak up in a way that's kind of awkward and I'm not really sure if I'm doing it right, just to say something and not leave it to the Black person or, another person of color to like defend and speak against racism or speak against the.
Oh, I agree. In fact, if somebody says something that when I'm really worried about going back to school mm-hmm. right now, I brought this up. We had a online office hours meeting last week. and people were talking about their concern about the COVID stuff and how we go, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? And I finally, told myself I wasn't going to say anything, but then I failed. And I said, my concern is culturally and politically right now, we are in a very terrible spot as a nation. So what am I going to do as a teacher? And this has nothing to do with COVID. What am I going to do as a teacher when somebody has something that offends me or I think would be insensitive on their face mask?
Mm-hmm.
Like say all lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, do we need to have that discussion? And I know our community, I know we have parents that don't even agree that there is a virus, that thinks this is all politically made up to hurt Donald Trump.
Right.
And so I don't know how to deal with these kids between the politics. When we go back, I'm scared to death. Not so much of the disease, but how to deal with everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if some kid makes a stand, and I brought it up, and what I was told, I didn't really like the answer very much, but they said, it's the only answer she could give, I guess, was like, if it's inappropriate, we'll deal with it like we do, like we try to normally. Mm. And I'm thinking right now, this idea of appropriate and inappropriate has become, it is not clear cut.
Right. And who is it that gets to decide that?
Right. Absolutely. And if it's offending one person, or if say I get defensive about some comment that's being made, and I have a student of color, and I'm very concerned about that student of color. A student of color tells me, "Oh, Mr. Miller, it's okay. Don't worry about it."
Yeah.
No, it's not okay.
Right.
It's not okay. So I'm afraid that I'm going to go off the deep end at some point, and I don't know what's going to. I hope I got to keep my mouth shut more. But then again, I wonder. Maybe not. It's my last year teaching. Maybe I can say whatever I want. I don't know.
Yeah, go for it.
Maybe before I have to retire.
Yeah,
I'll get fired before the COVID gets me. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, the challenges that teachers are up against right now are pretty gigantic.
Yeah.
I would say in this new sort of way of teaching, like whether we're in person with masks and all the precautions or whether we're online, like that changes a lot. Because the things I've been thinking about with this idea of like an anti-racist environment are thinking more about the less overt things, like the microaggressions that I might be doing without even noticing or thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then also the way that the whole school system is set up against Black and Latinx kids, that it's, the testing, the suspension rates, all of that stuff. So thinking like, what can I do to counter that?
Right. And it gets frustrating when the response is, the Black percentage is smaller as far as population goes, but as far as infractions go, it's disproportionate.
Yeah.
So, we have no choice but to behave this way. Well, no, there's got to be a cause for that.
Right.
I mean, everybody was born as a baby. They come into this world innocent and full of potential. No, I don't think anybody's born evil. So what has contributed to whatever this is, this disproportionate, inappropriate behavior or whatever? And also, I find myself thinking this a lot lately. If I was Black and I'm a teenager, say, it wouldn't really matter, but especially as a teenager, and I'm trying to sort out my life and where I fit and what my future potential might be. And then every time I turn on the TV, I see a cop with his knee on somebody's neck, somebody begging for their mother because they're dying and that's their last breath. And they're Black. They're all Black. It's always Black.
Right.
I hear the president of the United States come on and say the nonsense he says, and it's institutionalized. So I'm like, I don't have a chance. What? And so what do? There's maybe three things. I guess you try to hold your head down and go with the flow, or you give up, or you respond violently. I don't mean violent, but you respond strongly, So, and none of those are good options.
Right. Yeah. So that's an interesting aspect to like why the behavior statistics and the suspension statistics are what they are. But the other thing I feel like is, who deems what is inappropriate, and teachers looking at the same behavior from a Black student versus a white student and calling out the Black student.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's the other thing. It's these biases that kind of
of go unchecked. So many layers to that issue.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's going to be conversations. I know there's going to be conversations about monuments because we used to investigate that idea, but it had nothing to do with the current dialogue with monuments. I'm like, with the way I used to deal with it was, okay, you live in a little town called Bluebell. What's the history of your community? They don't know. Because I've moved around all my life, whenever I move to a new place, I'm curious to find out what's the history of that place. Yeah. I live in a little borough called Ambler, and there was this whole thing about a train wreck many years ago, and this lady, Mary Ambler, who saved people's lives and all this stuff. Yeah. That's awesome. Our neighboring community, or this borough, Bluebell, when I looked that up, it used to be before carrier pigeons became extinct. It used to be called Pigeon Town. Huh. Actually, there was a sign. I saw a sign on the side of the road that said, formerly known as Pigeon Town. I said, what the heck is that? So I Googled it, and apparently the flocks of pigeons back in the old days were so thick that you couldn't even, it looked like it was dark out.
Wow.
So I made up an assignment. I said, okay, we're going to talk about monuments and stuff, and I want you to go into wherever you live, one of the little neighboring communities, try to find out something about it, and see if there is somebody that was worthy of a monument or of memory. And so they were like, oh, okay. So that was part of it. And then, of course, pretty quickly, somebody asked, does it have to be real? And I was like, well, okay, awesome. That's rich. Let's go there. What do you mean by real? And they were like, well, does it have to be, Joe Smith? So I don't know. How would we know? Again, going back to history, how do we know what's true and what's not? Somebody decided this. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. And I said, so that's up to you. And I wanted it to be fun. So what that opened up, and we made cardboard monuments that were like life size.
Oh, wow.
So it was so creative. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Well, right now, it would be an awesome time to redo our history. Bring out the stuff that needs to be brought out.
Yeah.
And, some Confederate officer does not deserve a military base or a monument or any of those.
Right.
So,
yeah. Thank you for taking the time to come back to this and talk through these topics that you could keep going forever.
Yeah.
It's been really helpful for me too, doing these little follow-up chats and getting to kind of hear other teachers' perspective. And
yeah, I think it's cool. Yeah. And in fact, after you've done an interview, you think of things that you might have wanted to say or forgot or whatever. And I'm sure, from your perspective, some things you might have asked.
Right.
And then, of course, in our situation, so much is changing so rapidly, or not even changing, but the developments are so rapid. They're daily right now. So this topic becomes super rich, far more rich than it was 3 months ago.
Yeah. And could you describe what you make? Describe your artwork a little bit?
Well, I actually was afraid that you were going there when you mentioned the book called Dot.
Because you have dots in
I have a lot of dots. Again, that's something I didn't set out to do. But it's weird because I look back at my early work and I had dots then too. Just not in the same way. My current work it's not about anything. It's heavy texture. Right now, I don't know, for the last year or two, I've been working with the interplay between paint and fabric, the surface design on fabric. And sometimes it's wallpaper, but I like upholstery type fabrics best.
Yeah.
And I repeat them because, I don't have an endless supply. And plus there's certain things I like, so I'll want to use it again. I work small these days, pretty much 5x7, 4x5, 12x14. I used to work large, but I had no place to put it, and it cost a lot of money to work that way.
Yeah.
And I hauled it all around the United States, where several years ago I finally loaded it all up and took it to the dump, which was painful, but liberating. It was very painful as I drove away and I saw a bulldozer hit my pile of paintings, and one went flying in the air. I almost cried. I was like, my wife was in the car with me, and the dump stunk like a dump, and there goes my artwork. It was something that had been so important to me. But it was liberating, and I thought, okay, I have photos of it, whatever. Yeah. But the work that I do now, I work in batches of, like, say, 10, 12 pieces. I try to do that per month. And so there's this, working with the fabric, it occurred to me that seems to be three things that can happen for me with the pattern on the fabric. Either I'm working with with that fabric pattern or the pattern on the fabric, or I'm working against it, or I'm ignoring it. So I think, and I've thought about this a lot, and maybe it sounds stupid, but those are like pretty much the only three things that can happen. And the dots, I also like lines. I like texture. I love texture.
Yeah, I definitely see that.
My earlier days, I used to mix sawdust up with my paint and knife it on, and it was I loved it. Nice. So I don't work with sawdust anymore, but the dots became more and more prevalent, and I don't know, people would make comments, and I was getting to the point where I think I was getting more comfortable with my own voice, I guess. And my colors are, I'm from South Texas and I live in the Northeast. And my colors tend to be bright. I love the pinks and the turquoises and stuff like that a whole lot. And I have collected, just not intentionally, but I have picked up Wissahickon carvings, wood carvings and so forth over the years. And I have them all over our house, and the animals and the little masks and stuff. And there's this sort of there's this area where I go around every morning. I open our mini blinds, and every evening I close them. It's just a routine. And so I lean over this area where there's a couple hanging plants, and I lean over to open the window, and I have a couple of those. I have Wissahickon things everywhere. And one day I was leaning over, and my face is usually like 2 inches away from this one particular mask of a jaguar when I'm opening up the mini blinds. And all of a sudden, I looked at the mask, and I was just floored because all those pieces have little dots. And I was like, oh my God. I called my wife. She's like, oh, okay, whatever. I said, hey, come here. Check it out. There's dots. Oh, geez. Yeah, I see that. I said, no. I was wondering. I think I've been influenced by this forever. It's an influence, I think. So I'm kind of like digging it. I like it where it's coming from. I don't know where it's going, but I like that maybe it's just a fantasy I have, but I like that there is some sort of cultural antecedent to what I currently do. Because my work really isn't about anything. It's not about texture. It's just something I do. It used to be representational, but over the last however many years, maybe 20, that's something I strive for, is to make it not about anything, which is pretty much impossible. I don't have titles. I have a numbering system. So it might be like, what do I have right now? I'm working on little wood panels now. So it might be SP for small panel, and then I'd have 1, and then in parentheses I would have 5/20 for the month and the year. So I would have 1 through whatever, and then next month that one number will change.
Right.
I can't keep up with it. I mean, it's on my website, but I don't. Whenever something gets sold or traded, I'm terrible about recording that. There's been several times somebody wanted something, I go to look for it, I'm like, oh, I think I gave that away or sold it. I don't think I have that anymore. And it's interesting because the artists that I follow and that influence me because of their process or whatever are all abstract artists. But there's different types of abstraction, of course. And like my friend Ian Williams's work is, I would say, somewhat minimal. He'd probably hate me saying that, but it's kind of minimal in the application. But he always has literary titles, which I'm not a title guy at all anymore. I used to be. I had this series of frogs and animals that were large, like 5 feet square, and I used tons of glitter. I was using spray paint, this is Day-Glo spray paint back in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s. And I would, I'm always irritated by politics and whatever's going on. And so I would call there was a group of walruses, and I called them gentlemen of the jury, because that's, I was making fun of things like that. But then that's gone from my work now. I don't even go there. I don't title anything. Lately, I have some sticks that have, my dots have started to come out. So I've had a couple of sticks that branches fell out of a tree in my backyard, and I dried them out and just peeled off the bark, primed it and painted it, and drilled holes and put little dowels in it. They're about 18 inches long, and they have dots, of course. They have dots on the sticks, but then in my mind, the dowels as they come out are like 3D dots.
Right.
I did some others, sort of recently, that were just found lumber under my house that were like 2x3s, and I wrapped them with canvas, primed them, and put some dotted fabric on it, and it painted more dots. So I don't know. I'm branching out from, no pun intended, but I am, getting not away, but I'm trying to do additional work.
Yeah.
It's just, there's no time. Right. I'm looking forward to retirement. I hope that I'm going to be able. My wife and I were planning on retiring at the end of the next school year, and I have this fantasy. I'm a morning person more than an afternoon afternoon or evening person. I have a fantasy that I'm going to be able to get up in the morning, which I'm sure I will. I think this will be a no-brainer. I'm sure I'll be able to do this. Get my cup of coffee and go make stuff. And make stuff as long as I feel motivated to make stuff.
Right.
I don't have to go to work. I don't have to feel like I got to turn some report in or write some curriculum or, I hope. Yeah. I don't really think we're going to travel much. We won't have any money. But that's another reason I work small. And we don't have any space and we don't have much money. So, right. I mean, we do have jobs and we're very happy about that. But if you've been working, I look at online, I look at people's studios, and I've visited many studios, but I look at all these artists with all these huge pieces. And I'm like, where do you put all that?
Right.
And if you move, gosh, I know from experience, it's a pain in the butt to haul all that stuff to another location. Yeah. And not only that, when I paint thick, I mean, when I'm painting in oil, which I haven't done in a couple of years, but my oil paintings, I can go through a $40 tube with like 2 squirts, and go, oops, no, I need more of this color. Oh no.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I don't think people consider that often, the cost of being an artist.
Yeah. Of all the materials. Yeah. I wanted to ask, I guess, a few questions about materials. Where do you find your fabrics or wallpapers, sort of those surface patterns?
That's a really good question. That started with donations to school.
Yeah.
Because, when you're an art teacher, everybody in the community thinks that you need their trash.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you need these. And sometimes, it could be a couple boxes of baby food jars. You go, yeah, I totally need these.
Right.
We can totally use these. But a lot of times it's, rusted cans of terrible old house paint that's not even water-based. And then you finally open it and it's solid anyway. We had lots of fabric. And right around in my neighborhood, there was a frame gallery that also did wallpapering stuff. And so she was giving me those books, the wallpaper books that you can get.
Yeah.
I got a couple of them from Etsy. I like it better when I find it. And so that's where I get the fabric. And I was painting on canvases. I don't stretch my own anymore. I don't have time. I don't have the patience. I'd rather be painting than constructing, which is why I understand why my kids want to make art and not to do other things, my students. So I would order like 24 8x10s from Dick Blick, the less expensive. When I was working with oil, I got some linens because that seems to be the hip thing that everybody does. Some Belgian linen, I was all cool too. And then my colleague, my friend said, dude, and Ian works on linen a lot. He goes, why are you working on linen? I said, because I want to be cool too. He goes, but you put like 3 inches of paint on top of it. So what difference does it make? I'm like, oh, good point.
Right.
So yeah, I haven't been working on linen. After that, I was like, why spend the extra money?
Yeah.
And then I was really into the 4x5s. I love that format, but nobody makes them anymore. Nobody anywhere makes a 4x5 inch stretch canvas anywhere. You can get, Fredericks makes these little ones, but they're really thin. They're like the, I don't know, something I don't want.
Like the boards or something.
Yeah, like the hobby, like you see it at Michael's, and sometimes the little ones that go in a little bit easels.
Yeah.
But so they didn't have it anymore. And I tried everywhere. I was Googling all over the place. I ordered a couple batches. It turned out to be not what I wanted. And there's an art supply store locally. There's a Dick Blick in Philly, but I'm about 20 miles out. But there's the Artist Craftsman Supply, which is another store that's in Philly and New York and several places. But they opened one up right down the road, not far from where I live. And I would go there a lot because it's a really good little art supply store. And the people that work in there are awesome. And I was talking to this guy who's become whose art I love, and this guy named Mikkel Elam. And I was talking with him, and I said, nobody gets it. Nobody makes these anymore. And he goes, well, if you ever worked on the wood panels? I said, actually, no, but I'm interested. I just haven't. And he says, well, all our wood panels are made by some guy up in Canada. So I'll ask him if he'll make you some 4x5s. And I said, sure. So sure enough, the guy made them, but I have to wait for them. So I would order like 24 or whatever my wife would let me order. and then they come and I'm in heaven. I sand the edges and round it off a bit. And then I just start slapping stuff on it. And I like to work in groups, like 10 or 12, because I like to see them come together as not really as a group, but they tend to look like that as a series, Right. So that's how I work with that stuff. And I'm totally entertained with that. My most recent show, somebody said, several friends have said this, you need to work bigger. And I said, well, as soon as you pay for it, I might. But so I thought, maybe I will. So I went and got a couple of 11 by 14 panels, and what's the next size? 14 by 17 maybe. So I was working on it, and it felt enormous. I thought,
right after those little 4x5.
Yeah, I thought, man, I can't believe I used to work like 5 and 6 and 7 feet, and this 14 inches feels like I'm painting a wall. So I did that, and the other challenge was when I worked larger, I didn't want it to look different. I wanted it to be the same vibe, only in a larger format, which was kind of hard to do. So I might go back to that a little bit at some point.
Yeah, it's always tricky to change scale so dramatically, but it's interesting because I had a question about scale because looking online, it's hard to tell how large they are.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I like it. Sometimes when people see them in real life, they're like, what? That's small.
Yeah.
Of course it is. But yeah, I recently got 5x7s because they couldn't get me the 4x5s, or I needed them. I couldn't wait. Sometimes it takes like 6 weeks to get them. And I'm not patient. I was like, no, I need that, or else I'm going to go in a different direction, and I don't want to go in a different direction yet. I'm still liking this, and I'm not tired of it. I want to do more. So I bought some 5x7s, which is larger, but I'm liking the 5x7. My next batch that I'll post will all be 5x7s.
Well, there's an interesting curatorial, I'm not sure what to call it, like a space on Instagram that's really only on Instagram called Shoebox Space. I don't know if you've seen that at all.
I have seen that.
Yeah, that I could picture your work there, because to me that space makes it feel like when you see the images, you think, well, this is like a white cube. It's a gallery, and you can picture a little person standing there. But the work it fits in a shoebox. It's tiny.
That's very cool. I'll have to revisit that. I had heard of that years ago or whenever, and I looked at it, but I forgot all about it.
Yeah, your work would be perfect. Yeah. And I also it doesn't sound like this was like an intention, but one of the first things I noticed about your work was I do like how it's sort of split up, like on your website, you have it split by year. And just looking at 2020, initially I was like, oh, he's inspired by the virus. Like this work resembles like visualizations I've seen of that.
I know. I'm getting that a lot right now.
Yeah.
That's totally unintentional.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm making the coronavirus paintings, which is not at all. Not at all. When I first saw that graphic, I thought, oh no. Now I'm going to be forever linked to the virus.
Yeah. Just add some more stripes in there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I also just love seeing the progression, like the way it's changed over the years.
Yeah. I like to do every now and then I go back and I go through the years just to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And I feel like I need to spend as much time as possible periodically listening to what my work has to say back to me, because I feel like it's a dialogue with materials. And that's something I try to explain to students and get them to engage in, because early on when I was first getting into art, I remember in college hanging out up in the library on the floor where they had all the oversized art books, which was heaven when I was discovering all that. But there was a couple of sofas, and I'd pull books off and go look at all the big glossy plates. This was before the internet, of course. But I remember Picasso, there seemed to be two types of images or photographs that stood out to me. One was him in the studio with tons of stuff, goats walking around and, animals and just stuff everywhere. And he'd be in a pair of shorts with no shirt on, smoking a cigarette. And I was like, wow, there's the life. Not the cigarette smoking, but, And then the other photo was one that really stood out to me. He'd be in a big room, and there would be like a director's chair, some sort of chair sitting there with maybe a mug of coffee on the floor. And there would be a bunch of pieces, not a whole lot of pieces, up on easels in a semicircle. And that really, I was drawn to that type of photo. And I realized, to me, what he was doing was having a dialogue with the work he made. And he was, so productive. He made more work than most anybody. But that he was sitting there having a conversation with his work. And as I evolved and as I talk with my students, I tell them that I think he was listening to what they had to say back to him. He made something, and it's not just an inanimate object. It's part of him. And there's some sort of dialogue there that he can learn from, and it carries him on to the next, whatever it is he does. And so that's one of the things I like to do. It's one of the nice things about having a website is you can go back to previous years and go, wow, I don't even remember doing this, but I kind of like this. Or wow, I was so much more free then, or I was really minimal then. That's awesome. I wish I could do that again.
Yeah, I love that idea of having a dialogue with the work. And I wanted to ask also about your color choices and how you kind of decide, is it really intuitive?
It depends on what's sitting there on the table for the most part. Yeah. I have flash paint, and I love the flash paint. I'm a major flash paint person. And then I have this Sennelier abstract series, which is not flat. It's not matte. It's a glossy, regular, traditional type acrylic paint. So I like that interplay between the matte and the gloss. But now I'm really pretty much only exclusively use those two. Yeah. I have other paints sitting around. There's another art supply store called Jerry's Artorama. Not only does it have the coolest name, they have supplies that are not found at Dig Blick or some of the other places, like some German paints and Australian paints. And they're fun, but I don't use them as much.
And do you add any mediums in?
I do. Yeah. I actually do.
To thicken it up?
Yes, I do, because it's one way to make it a little cheaper in the long run. So when I'm preparing a panel or a canvas, that's what I do. I start brushing on this medium. It's a heavy gel from Golden, I think. Yeah. I was using maybe Liquitex, but then they were out of it, so I had to buy, I spent a little bit more on the Golden. And I get it on sale whenever I can. Yeah. And I use so much of it now. I buy it by the gallon, which is a lot of money. It's like $100.
Right.
So I knife that on there. And then I put a piece of fabric. And then when I go to the color, I decide how much of the fabric to cover up. But I've also been seeing these little panels, the fabric almost, especially on the series I'm working on right now, it almost looks like little theaters to me. And so it's like there might be a rectangle of the fabric, and then I have paint and texture all around it. And of course, I decide whether to put paint on the fabric or not. Most of the time I do. But I'm really infatuated with the surface design on the fabric. I'm like, no, don't let that keep you from doing what you're doing. If you want to put some paint there, put some paint there. So I do that. I'm seeing these little things like those little theaters. I don't know. Just this past week or so, I've been thinking of that. So this is not a developed thought.
Yeah, but I love that they're like, there's a little thing playing out there on that fabric.
Yeah.
And I'm looking through some of them. It looks like sometimes maybe you add a little bit of like flat paint on top of the fabric and change what's happening there.
Yeah.
Is that right? Do you do that sometimes?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. It's so interesting to see that process. And then the painting, like adding the texture around the sides of it as well. So it becomes like a sculptural object.
Yeah, that's something I started doing some years back when I first started making art again, because as I was trying to find my way, most of my friends that paint like to leave the edges bare. So you could either see the linen or you could see whatever. And I did that a few times, but it wasn't me. Yeah. And then, if it drips around the side, I know that's cool, but I was like, no, I'm wrapping it around.
Yeah.
And so I had a little show. There's an artist out here, Douglas Whitmer, who's an awesome guy, awesome artist, and awesome friend. He has a couple of coffee shops, and he gave me a show some years ago. And so I took a box of paintings down there. These were like 8x10s, I think. And he and Ian Williams were hanging the show, because I'm terrible at hanging my own work. I can hang other people's works, but I'm terrible at doing my own. And so I set the box down, and Douglas goes, "Wait a minute." He goes, What is this? And I said, "This is my canvases. I mean, what am I doing wrong?" And he said, "Just a minute." He went and got a camera, and he photographed the edges, because the edges are all, painted and different. And it's just different. I didn't realize that was different, So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, with they look spiky, like little spikes coming
this
off.
Work I'm doing now, you can actually hurt yourself on my paintings now.
Watch out.
As I go to pick them up, I'm like, ouch. Those little points are sharp.
Yeah, I am a fan of covering the edges as well. I try to do that sometimes more successfully than others.
Yeah, well, I know what you mean. Also, standing them up for storage. Sometimes just like, well, I don't want to smash this.
Right.
But whatever. I'm kind of cavalier about the longevity issue.
Yeah. And how long does it, I guess it's acrylic, so it doesn't take a ton of time, but it probably takes some time to dry.
Bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. I have been too impatient multiple times. And then it just goes, if I smash something or smear something, it just goes another direction.
Yeah. You just go with it and change it.
Yeah.
I love that. And thinking of like showing your work and selling your work, how do you go about that? What sort of like opportunities have been the best?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I am not good at seeking opportunities. I'm just not. Yeah. And I've always felt like I'm not part of the in crowd, but I realized, with social media has done everything for me when I first started putting my work online. And there's a woman in New York, Julie Torres, and she is an angel, and her partner, Ellen, they have a gallery up in Hillsdale now. They were in Brooklyn, and she would do pop-up shows back during the Bushwick Open Studio times. And one year, I don't know how it happened, but she invited me to show work. And I was like, you've got the wrong person. We don't even know me. I'm David Miller. And she was like, no. Yeah, I really love your work. And would you be interested? And then she also reached out to my friend Ian. So we were like, but Ian had already been showing stuff and selling stuff, and I hadn't sold anything in 30 years. And I wasn't showing anything either. So we went up there. I was intimidated big time, but she opened up a lot of things for me personally and gave me more confidence, and things have snowballed. It's not really active, but there's a guy in Ohio, Jeffrey Cortland Jones, that has shown my stuff, I don't know, 4 or 5 or maybe even more times. So it kind of comes to me. Julie and Ellen have the little gallery they have up there now. It's called Lab Space. And I put work in for their holiday show. And those boards I was talking about, the 2x3s, or the 2x3s that were about, 18 inches long. And she needs to sell. She's a gallery person. Yeah. And my prices are accessible, which is another conversation. But they're not cheap. They're accessible. I feel strongly about that. They're not inexpensive. They're accessible. Yeah. So she says, we were supposed to put one piece in or something like that. And I said, I don't know which one of these 4. She said, send me all 4 of them. And she said, do you think $200 a pop or $225 is okay? And I said, nobody's going to want these. And she said, well, are you okay with that? I said, sure, whatever. So she sold all 4 of them. Wow. Like immediately. And I'm like, wow, the sticks, she's doing it. They're trying to make more money, trying to survive. Right. And I sent her 3 of the stick pieces that I was describing to you earlier with the dowels. Yeah. And two out of the 3 of those sold. Awesome. Like quickly, like the first day. And so that's been really special for me. There's a gallery that recently closed here in Ambler. Ambler is only 1 square mile, so there's not a whole lot going on. It's a great place to live. Yeah. But there was a gallery, the Cellini Gallery, and there's a couple, Lisa and Carl Cellini. They, over the last years, they gave me 2 solo shows, which was really, really special to be able to see like 120 of my pieces in a room. Yeah, amazing. And the first time, of course, I was really intimidated, but I sold 20 pieces in a very little time. But again, the prices aren't high. Yeah. So it's important to me to be in people's homes. If they like it, then I want them to have it, So I've had that experience. And so I don't really actively seek. I have a couple things right now that I want to send something to, but I usually, I still get crushed if I don't get accepted. Yeah. I'll send something to a show and then I get the standard rejection letter. Right. And I'm like, okay, never, I'm not doing this anymore.
I don't know does that ever go away?
I don't know. I guess some people are better at acting like they don't care. Yeah. But it wounds me.
Thinking about pricing, do you, if you're selling out really fast, would you raise your prices a little bit, or do you want to kind of keep them at that accessible rate?
I would want to keep them accessible. Yeah. Because some of the folks that I'm around, depending on if they have gallery representation, their work has to be $1,800. Yeah. Because that's what the gallery sells it for. Right. And they can't undercut that. Right. Which I find early on, I thought, well, it'd be cool to be represented by a gallery. But then I was like, nah. Yeah. If somebody wants me to submit something to some show in Australia to benefit somebody, I don't want anybody telling me I can't do that. Right.
Yeah. And then how do you decide on those prices? That's a big question.
I lick my finger and I put it in the wind and I'm like, well, I have come down. I started off being influenced by others, as always. Yeah. And so I would have pieces that were, $800. Yeah. And I would go home with the same pieces that were $800. And people would talk, I'd be there. Like, oh yeah, these are lovely. These are lovely. Oh yeah, we might get one. Blah, 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 blah. And nothing ever happened. Right. And then with the Cellini show, I said, no, this is where my accessibility concept was born. Yeah. And they were like, your prices are too low. And I'm like, No, I don't care.
Yeah.
If you want to raise them, go whatever. But I need emotionally to have something to sell at that point of my life. I need that reinforcement. And they're like, okay. Well, I think they wound up making more money off of me than they made off of other people because my work was selling.
Yeah.
So, and now I'm really interested in trying to go, I'd like to get my act together enough, maybe in retirement, to go to some of the upscale craft things in the summer, set up a booth and sell my dots.
Yeah.
And if nobody buys it, oh well.
Yeah, it's the experience. Nice.
Sit out there in the sun and drink a couple beers. Yeah. Watch people walk by. It's worth
Share
life.
your work.
Worst things to do in life. Yeah.
Bring a little. Would you be able to bring like some materials and sit there painting?
Oh, I'm sure.
Or is it too much of a setup?
It depends.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I would hope that I would be busy enough not to have time to do that. But no, I think a lot of times when I go to those, I do see the artists working, and I think that's communicates a positive message. Plus, people that don't have a clue what you're doing, they enjoy seeing you do it.
Yeah.
Like whenever I've worked in school in front of students, which I never did forever, but then I started doing it some. Yeah. They loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you share your work now? You said you've worked in front of them sometimes, but do you like share photos of your work with kids or talk about it?
Yeah, they can go to my website. Well, when I'm telling them to have a website, I don't ask them to do anything I don't do. And so I feel like I should be some sort of role model.
Right.
So, I say, here's my website if you want to look at it. But by the same token, I don't promote it. I don't talk about my work
all the time.
Very often. I don't talk about it very often. I talk about my process periodically, the creative process and the notion of artist block and all this other stuff. I don't really show my work like, hey, check out what I just did. I've been around teachers that do that. And I'm like, I think that's a little tacky. So it's not really for self-promotion. It's like, we're all artists here. You just happen to be 17. I happen to be 65. Yeah. So what?
Yeah. I like to talk about, like, I will mention my process, but then also say, like, this is how I do it. I know other artists who do things differently, and I'm curious how you do it.
Yeah. Well, my very first week teaching a long time ago, a kid came up and said, with some pigments, and said, "So, Mr. Miller, how do you make flesh tone?" And I looked up and I said, "Huh? What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I said, what are you asking me this question? What is this question?" He said, "Well, I need to make flesh color." I said, "Okay." So I got her green and I got her blue and I stirred it up and it was this really ugly green. And I said, "That's how I make it." She said, "Don't don't make fun of me." I said, "I'm not making fun of you. You asked me how I do it." I said, "If you look at," of course, this student had really thought about it. She was young. So if you look around the room, do you see a standard flesh tone? And she had her eyes open. But yeah, again, this is how I do it. This is how that person does it. Which is another reason why I tell the kids they need to be looking at as much art as possible. Yeah. Especially contemporary stuff. Not just in fact, I'm pretty much removed from the dead white male Europeans. Yeah. It's like look at social media, look at people close to your age and look at contemporary things and see what they're doing. Then you'll find yourself.
Yeah, like there's so many paintings with, the skin is purple or red or green or,
Absolutely.
And it's an accurate color because of the lighting and like what's, or it's not accurate the way a photo would be, but it's accurate to that feeling and whatever they're trying to say.
Or I'd pull out a book on German expressionists and say, "Here, check it out." Yeah. And they're like, "That skin is yellow, that skin is green, that skin's blue." Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I do some like this year before we kind of shut down, I was working on a school-wide project of a skin tone mosaic where I was trying to teach each kid in the entire school how to mix their own color. And with the older, like I think from first grade up, we were starting with the primary colors and we could add a little white or a little black if we needed to, but having that push and pull between colors. And they got so excited about, "Oh, look, it's tan, it's gold, it's brown. Look at this brown. No, I have a different brown."
Yes, that's a fun thing about young kids. Yeah. Everything is a discovery.
Yeah, it's so exciting.
Older kids get jaded. They're like, yeah, right.
Right. Yeah, you probably don't hear the yelling across the classroom about mixing the color gold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I know you mentioned creative block. How do you kind of get past creative block?
Well, that's
a hard one.
That's the hardest question.
Yeah.
And that's something, the conversation I have with students, which I try to live by also, is that there was a famous quote from Picasso again, when you can't paint, paint. And it makes sense unless you're experiencing creative block. And then you're like, yeah, but I don't feel like it. And with young people, I'm not inspired today. And there's the other quote by Chuck Close. Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work.
Yeah.
So I've shared those many times, and I try to live by that.
Yeah.
Because there are times, and right now it's one of those times, where I just need to go, working in the basement. I don't have a studio anymore. I just need to go get lost in it. It is an escape, can be an escape, but it's not going to get done if I don't do it, So if I want things to get done, I need to work on them. And the other payoff is seeing when I've finished a batch of 10 or 12 pieces and I don't think I can do anything more to them, or I want to do anything more to them, and I sit there and I photograph them and I look at them and I put them on the wall finally and I go, I'm happy. It's like, I'm really pleased. This is really, it's a really good feeling. And I want that, I'm addicted to it.
Yeah.
I want that sense of accomplishment again.
Yeah. So it's like motivation that makes you keep going. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I talk to so many artists that talk about having a daily practice, or even if it's not daily, like a weekly, every Wednesday, I'm going to do such and such. And like just having that sort of dedication.
Yeah.
And I feel like I struggle to have that, but I feel like it is helpful. When you have a family
and a job, it makes it a lot harder.
It's a lot.
You're like, okay, when am I going to squeeze 30 minutes in here?
Yeah.
So
how have you kind of fit it all in?
It's crazy. It's whatever. I do the best I can, and I always feel like I could have done better. But it just, I don't have a structure. I don't have a set schedule. I do what I can when I can.
Yeah, that's a challenge. It's a big one.
Absolutely.
And what are you kind of curious about right now?
That's a really tough question.
I know.
I'm curious about how much longer America is going to last.
Yeah.
That's a very heavy thing for me to say, but I am sick in my stomach. I can't get away from it all. I can't get away from the news. I can't get away from stuff that I just can't comprehend and that other people are supporting. I can't get away from people with artillery marching on the state capitol because they feel like they should be able to go out and infect other folks. I can't get over the leadership, or lack thereof, that we have right now.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about what's going to happen. When I was really young in the school and reading history and stuff, I thought, you read about the British Empire, you read about all these other empires that ended. And I remember at that time, this was like during Vietnam, saying, America isn't going to last forever. I mean, maybe we will. I hope so. So I worry about that, especially now that I have two sons. When you have your own kids, you're like, oh my gosh, what have I done?
Yeah. Oh,
So I'm curious. I guess worried is more of the answer to that. I'm curious about where things will go. I'm not curious about where art will go, because art's going to survive. People will make art no matter what.
Yeah.
So my students right now that are freaking out because of things like the virus and not having a prom, I'm like, well, people made art during World War II and during World War I and during every other conflict, people made work. I mean, Anne Frank had a diary. And she lived in a wall, I think. I don't know. I'm not curious about, I'm not worried about art, because art's going to just continue and it's going to get cooler and cooler.
Yeah.
So curiosity, I don't know. Where are we going?
Yeah, that's all those big worries. I know. I try to push some of those out of my mind and just mush clay with my fingers.
Yeah. Well, actually, clay is something that I've just started getting back into, and I'm really excited. And I have stuff locked up in school, but I did ceramics in my undergraduate years, but I was a hand builder, and I wasn't around it. I didn't have an opportunity to work with clay for like ever. But now that I've been teaching the intro to ceramics, I've got those sections, and I got over my fear of the wheel, and I've gone back to hand building some stuff. But what's really a blast right now is to see how my ceramics is being influenced by my painting, and maybe a little vice versa now. So I can't wait to pursue that. I'm curious about where that's going to go.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited. I can't wait to get back in and get some of the few things that I've made this year, bring them home and look at them.
Yeah, that could be really cool, especially with how sort of sculptural your paintings are already.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'm going to have to keep following that. Keep me updated.
Yeah, I will. I might get the nerve to post a couple on Instagram or something.
Yes. Do it.
All the real potters will get mad at me. I'll say, there's this poser over. He doesn't even know what he's doing. But I'm used to that.
Thinking of like the flip side of what you're not so good at, what is one of the best compliments you've ever gotten?
I was wondering if you were going to ask that question, because I saw that on your list and I thought, I don't know. But then I do know. This past fall, Douglas Whitmer, who I've mentioned before, he was having an open studio, and a lot of our local art folks from the greater Philadelphia area came, because everybody loves Douglas and his work, because he's just such a swell guy. But there's another artist, Steve Barris, who's actually also an art teacher, by the way. And he's a little bit older than I am, I think, a couple of years. And he's just, I look up to him a lot. I look up to him intellectually and artistically. And he's got, he's in work. His work is all over the world. And he teaches at a very cool school. He says he has the same problems that I have at my school. So I don't know. We don't get to see each other very often, but he was there. And we were talking in a group of people, and he says, it was just the two, him and I and my wife standing there for a minute. And he says, I really like your work. And I said, huh? What are you talking about? I said, oh, yeah, thanks. He goes, no, seriously. I was embarrassed. He says, I really like your work. He says, you really own what you do. And I said, huh? What do you mean? He says, nobody works like you do. And you do what you do better than anybody that would work like you, or something like that. He says, you own your work. That was the thing that really stood out.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, thanks, Steve. And I looked over at my wife, and she looked back at me. So it was that knowing look like, yeah, that was pretty cool. And so we talked about it later. I said, I think that was like a massive compliment I just received. Yeah. So Steve Barris saying that I think what he was saying is that my work has a voice, and maybe it's unique to me, which is pretty darn sweet.
Yeah, that's huge. I feel like that's the thing artists are constantly looking for. What's the voice? Yeah. Like, what is my thing?
It's my jam.
Yeah. And I agree with him.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
You found it. Yeah. Okay, this one's just a fun get-to-know-you question. What's your go-to order at your favorite restaurant?
Enchiladas verde. Green enchiladas is, well, first off, Mexican food. People tease me because I can eat Mexican food 3 times a day. But coming from San Antonio up to this part of the country, I was like, oh, no, I'm going to miss out on all my Mexican food. But there's good Mexican food up here now. And so green enchiladas. My wife likes the mole, and I like the verde. So I just had to mention that because I saw this question, and my wife goes, oh, I know what your answer is. I said, I hope yeah.
Yes. No, that's one that I always try to get in there because I think it's just a fun little like glimpse into your life outside of being an artist, outside of being a teacher.
Well, artists like food. I've discovered that. I'm not a cook by any means, which frustrates my wife. So, but man, I can strap on the feed bag, especially with Mexican food.
Oh, I love it. And do your kids like Mexican food too? Are they as into it as you are?
My sons are from outer space. I don't know where they're from. They do like, I have a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
And the 21-year-old is just finishing his junior year at Penn State, which is really a disaster because, he's at home doing virtual school. I'm glad he's not a senior because he had a really good internship lined up. He was studying to be a civil engineer, and he had a really good internship lined up for the summer, but now he's not going to get to do it, which is a heartbreak. And he needs the experience. But I'm glad that he didn't graduate this year.
Right.
Hopefully things will be better at the end of next year. My other son is not a student, a traditional student. He's not a college guy. He works at UPS. The younger one, he's very physical. Both of them have made great art, especially the older one. He's made some of my favorite pieces. Actually, some of his work has been a big influence on some of mine. Some of my shapes, some of my oval shapes. One day he had this piece that he had done in like elementary school. It's like crinkled paper. It's these 2 oval shapes with a circle around it or a line around it. And I said, Dallas, what's that? His name is Dallas. And I said, what's that? He goes, I don't know. Something I had to do. I said, well, what? It's cool. He goes, no, it's not. I said, well, what is it? He goes, it was bologna on a plate. I said, bologna on a plate? Are you kidding me?
That's great.
That's the richest thing I've ever heard in my life. So I've looked at that piece. It's on the side of the refrigerator, of course. And I have made bologna. My friend Ian has teased me. He says, you made a lot of bologna on the plates yourself. I said, yeah, it's because of him.
You need another solo show titled Bologna on a Plate.
Bologna on a plate, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, but they don't make art. They like food, but they're not really They're not picky like I am.
Yeah.
They're even keeled like their mother. Huh. They're not like I am.
Maybe makes it easier to only have one person in the house who's.
Well, I'm glad they've had each other, because we had our children later in life. We were told that we would not have children, and we did various things to try to work around that. And when we moved to Pennsylvania and got completely unemployed, we didn't even know what was wrong. My wife couldn't understand why she was feeling so bad, because there was no chance in our mind that she could be pregnant.
Yeah.
But sure enough, I'll tell people that that was the best way for us to have kids, was just to get completely unemployed. And then it was like, oh no, now what?
Yeah, that's always how it happens, right?
Yeah.
When you're kind of like given up or not expecting it, and
yeah, but they're a joy, and they're awesome. They get their bad qualities from me and their good qualities from their mom.
Is there someone who you would want to give a shout out to or thank?
The Philadelphia community, like I mentioned, there are some artists that I have, because of social media, I would have never met them probably. I would cross paths with them at openings and so forth. And that now I have friendships with that I just admire to the max. And now I'm more comfortable with the idea, like I was just describing, that they also like my work, that they respect me, which is really nice. So I want to list a few of those people. And then there's, of course, a couple of folks that have given me show opportunities. But, my wife, Ann, of course, she's the patient one, and she's supportive. Ian White Williams, the guy I work with and had a studio with, and I love his work. And we've spent a lot of time together because we work together and all that. Douglas Whitmer, I mentioned. Stuart Feynman, lives in the Philadelphia area. Awesome painter, awesome person. Alan Greenberg. Stuart and Alan Greenberg are like best friends. Tim Schwartz is another wonderful painter. He and Ian Williams are like best friends. And then Mikkel Elam, I mentioned the painter from the artist from the Artist Craftsman Art Supply Store. I love his work, and I have bought work from him. And several of these people I've tried to, whenever I can, I'll buy their work. Pam Farrell, there's a woman named Pam Farrell who's just really awesome. Steve Barris, like I just mentioned. James Perez, if you don't know James Perez, you need to find James Perez. He's up in Brooklyn, and there's nobody who does work like James Perez. And my website, I don't know if you've looked at the top of my website, I have a thing that says sounds. Yeah. I also
the music.
There's a song I wrote. I wrote a James Perez song. He said he said his mom cried. I was like, is it that bad? And those are like local artist friends I look up to and admire their process and everything that they do. And then Julie Torres. Julie Torres is the queen of the universe, and her partner Ellen Lecter. Jeffrey Cortland Jones, I mentioned, his work is awesome. He teaches at the college level in Dayton, and he has shown my work several times. Phil Mellon, who I think you know of.
Yeah.
Phil has been very supportive.
Yeah, he reached out to me to tell me to get in touch with you.
That's so cool.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. And then, of course, the people that own the gallery that doesn't exist anymore here in Ambler, Lisa and Carl Cellini. Carl is actually a really awesome artist himself. He has the coolest studio around. But yeah, those people I'd like to tip my hat to, because they are very important to me. And they've been very important to me developing a confidence level as an older artist.
Yeah.
And I greatly appreciate you reaching out to me. This was very special that you've given me this opportunity.
Yeah, no, it was great to hear. And yeah, I feel like I'll have to go back and listen a few times and get all the little nuggets of wisdom out of there. Final question. Where can our listeners find you and connect with you?
My website is davidtmillerart.com. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And then Instagram. Yeah. I also put stuff on Facebook, but I don't really do it as often on Facebook anymore. But Instagram, I generally keep that strictly for art. Yeah. I might rant on Facebook a little bit, but I don't talk much on Instagram, which is best. And on my website. Actually, on my website, that's part of my process. As soon as I finish a batch, I'll photograph them and post them on my website and on Instagram. So
nice. So you keep it really up to date.
Yeah, I don't let it back up, because if I do, I'll never get it done.
Yeah. And on Instagram, you're just David T. Miller. Yeah.
I think. Yep. I should have looked that up.
I just checked it.
Oh, good. Okay.
Looks like, yep. Awesome. Thank you so much, David.
Well, thank you so much.
I love how David talked about his lack of confidence and not necessarily overcoming it, but realizing that all artists deal with that and just accepting it. He said he's settled in to what he does and who he is.
Thank you so much for listening.
As always, you can reach me at Teaching Artist Podcast on Instagram or teachingartistpodcast@gmail.com. Who do you want to hear from? Please share your recommendations of teaching artists. And if you loved this episode, please subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow me. It really makes a big difference. Thank you.